You know, I'm a simple guy, all right, with simple needs. Yeah, sometimes those needs might be a little bit twisted or a bit dark, but that ain't no reason to kick me out of the goddamn house. Experimenting and trying new things that you may not have been open to before is important in any healthy relationship. There was absolutely no reason to call me foul. Wait, what were we talking about? Video games. We're talking about video games. You know, there's times where you just don't feel like playing one of these massive AAA titles with these huge maps and a bunch of pointless bullshit you gotta do over it, like fetch quests and shit. Sometimes you are perfectly content with just going left and right and tapping square until everything on the screen is dead. Simplicity, baby. And it just so happens to be there is a nice little bonus in there when it comes to memory space. Yeah, I can download Grand Theft Auto 5 for the 17th time and take up half my goddamn hard drive, or I can download like 85 different little games where I get to smack a big cartoon guy with a stick. I'm cool with that. Anyway, point is that I have played an unhealthy amount of these types of games, and as much as I have enjoyed my time with them, it is time to cash in and use the knowledge I have built over the years to force YouTube into giving me some cold hard dollar bills. So here's what we're gonna do. I have taken it upon myself to create a massive list of different games that I've played over the years. These sort of smaller flash indie type games. Take all the protagonists from them and then just throw them in the most fucked up place I could think of. And I'm hoping this video does one of three things. One, make me a lot of money. Number two, be a really cool mental exercise and conversation starter where I get to take a bunch of characters that people may not talk about all that much and throw them in an interesting situation. And three, show people who may not have played these types of games that much in the past that there's actually a wide variety of very cheap, high quality, fun games out there that you can go download and play right now. If that shit doesn't sound cool to you, I don't think we can be friends. Come on, man. What's wrong with you? So let's get started. All right, so let's look at the scenario that our heroes find themselves in. Each one of our heroes are setting sail for something. It doesn't matter. I don't know. It don't have to be that fucking exact. Until they are attacked by a massive sea monster, destroying their ship entirely. And wake up hours later on an unfamiliar beach. Having no idea where they are, they search the pile of shit that used to be their ship or anything that they could find. Lucky for them, they find all their weapons and equipment and set off into the unknown, trying to discover where it is they've landed and what exactly is going on. Each hero in this scenario will have all of their weapons, equipment, and power-ups, and we will be using the version of the character that appears at the end of each of their games, so that each character is at their absolute strongest and prepared for what's to come. What each character will do and how they will go about surviving the threats the island has will be based entirely on what that individual character would do in that given situation. Now on to the location. This will be an island known as the Lands of the Old Faith, and it is one of the most fucked up places in video game history. Honestly, I'd rather go to fucking Silent Hill than this place. It's a location from a game called Cult of the Lamb, and it's an island entirely ruled by two cults. And these aren't your fun orgy and hardcore drug type cults. No, these are more like the human sacrifice and cannibalistic type cults. Just about every single person in the population of this island is dogmatically loyal to one of these two cults. One being the Old Faith and the other being the Cult of the Lamb. The Old Faith rules over the vast majority of the island and is controlled by 4 bishops who are worshipped as God by the vast majority of the population. And that's for good reason, because these motherfuckers are powerful as shit. Each one symbolizes a different concept and their powers are based around whatever that concept is. And those would be chaos, famine, pestilence, and war. Not only does each bishop have powers that relate to that specific concept, like for instance at one point the Bishop of Famine just waves her hand, which causes an entire group of like 20 people to just start dying of starvation despite the fact that they had all just eaten. But on top of them having powers that relate solely to their concept, they also have like a bunch of other stuff. They can open up portals to other universes, summon monsters to attack, transform their followers into these giant abominations. They can control the elements, they can levitate, they can control people's minds, they can alter the environment any way they wish, and many, many more powers. Each one of these 4 bishops rule over a different section of the Lands of the Old Faith. Not only do these territories consist of each one of their individual armies of cultists, but also dangerous monsters and wildlife and all kind of traps and all manner of things that can get anyone that doesn't know their way around killed pretty damn fast. And the bishops are capable of granting their followers powers, and the more loyal their followers, the more power they give them. Because of this, a hierarchy is built up within the Old Faith, with the bishops being on top, a bunch of sub-bosses being right below them, but still very powerful, then a higher tier of more powerful henchmen-like cultists, and then below that, finally, the basic cultists. But there are many different types of cultists in this game with various powers, with everything from healing abilities to summoning abilities to teleportation to different type of elemental control, etc, etc. Overall, the Old Faith is the biggest force on the island and in control of the most shit. But not everyone on the island serves the cult. There are quite a few special individuals that for one reason or another are outside of the cult's purview, whether it's because they're just too powerful to fuck with or because they're too useful. Think of these characters like independent psychopaths. These are characters like Midas, a serial killer who is the very epitome of greed, who transforms anyone who wanders into his territory into gold that he hoards in this giant golden mountain throne thing. Next you have Helob, a giant spider who captures anyone unlucky enough to wander away from the safety of their cult lands. He's an absolute glutton that eats people alive, and anyone who he deems not tasty, he ends up selling into slavery. Or Sozo, a sentient fungus who took over the mind of a doctor and pretends to be kind and welcoming to all who find themselves unlucky enough to wander onto his land. He offers them shelter and takes pride in the fact that his land is the only safe place on the entire island. But if it sounds too good to be true in the lands of the old faith, it probably is. He uses psychedelic drugs to brainwash and control those on his land to the point that his followers don't remember who they were or why they were there in the first place. They just become these mindless, drugged up mental slaves that he toys with for his own sick pleasure. But this is only scratching the surface. There are countless characters, all of which are absolutely morally corrupt and fucked up as hell. But no one I've named so far is as evil, as vicious, as truly irredeemable as the final character I'm about to talk about. The Lamb himself. The Lamb is the god of death within the lands of the old faith. And that's not a metaphor. He's a literal god of death. He's a self-serving, opportunistic monster who has absolutely no qualms with sacrificing the lives of many, many people for his own personal benefit. As horrible as many of the crimes that I've named that some of the other characters on this island have committed, the Lamb beats them all. Not only has he committed all of the sins that I've already listed, but far more. He's done it all. Ritual sacrifice, cannibalism, forced cannibalism, false imprisonment, torture, eugenics, mass murder, slave trafficking, indoctrination, brainwashing, and mind control. He is by far the most evil person on the island, which makes it quite unfortunate that he is also the most powerful and pretty much in control of everything else. He's so powerful that he went to war with all 4 of the other bishops and defeated all of them single-handedly. Unlike the old faith who have entire armies backing them up, the Lamb actually doesn't have one, and he doesn't need one. He doesn't actually require that his cult members fight at all. He just uses them for his own personal benefit while slaughtering anyone who goes up against him. Some of the powers the Lamb has are possession, mind control, elemental manipulation, poison immunity, invulnerability, demon summoning, size manipulation, mind control, mind reading, telepathy, telekinesis, transmogrification, which is basically where he turns people into other things, like he's shown turning people into little bugs and shit, levitation, flight, teleportation, probability manipulation, plague manipulation, corruption manipulation. I don't actually know what this one is. He has multiple abilities that are specifically said to be corruption manipulation. This is an ability he has where anytime anyone hits him, every single person in the vicinity just gets damaged somehow. His blood is also made of this black ichor stuff that when it pours on the ground and you touch it, it starts doing damage to you that way too. It's called corruption manipulation. Again, not sure what it is, but it hurts. Soul manipulation, soul absorption, soul control. Basically, if he kills you, you can stop your ghost from going to the afterlife and just keep it here and force it to fight for him. That's a pretty fucked up one. Mind reading, dimensional travel, dimensional banishment, portal creation, life absorption, death manipulation, superhuman sense. It's not like an animal where he has super hearing or smell or anything like that, but basically he just knows where everything is around him at all times. It's like a really low level omniscience. He doesn't know the future or the past or anything, but he knows what's going on down the street despite the fact that he's nowhere near there. Know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I mean. Resurrection and death denial. Basically, if he doesn't want to die, he doesn't have to. Kind of the benefits of being a god of death. He's also very physically powerful as well as fast as fuck. He's capable of moving so fast that almost no one on the island except for the very top tiers can even see him moving. As far as physical strength goes, he's shown just walking through solid rock and just the force of his walk can just destroy the earth. He's also shown doing that Dragon Ball Z power-up shit, and by doing that, he destroyed an entire stone temple. This ain't much of a feat though, since we don't actually see how big the temple is. The biggest feat of power he's ever done is defeating the one who waits. This character's shown growing so large that he's actually bigger than an entire mountain range, and after the Lamb beats him, he acquires all the powers that the one who waits has. So, that's, you know, that's pretty decent. I'm sure there's more I missed, but I think that's plenty for now. If more of his abilities become relevant during the video, I'll bring those up later. But I think that's a good little grab bag of powers to get us started, don't you? Good luck, heroes. So first up on the chopping block is the Castle Crashers. This is the one that made me actually want to make this video in the first place. I put up a poll, I don't know, like a week ago, to see who would win in a fight between the 6 Knights and the Lamb, and people unanimously voted for the 6 Knights. This voting must have been based on Castle Crashers' popularity because there's no way people could ever think that these guys can defeat the Lamb. It's really not even close. The Castle Crashers are weak as fuck, especially when compared to the vast majority of the lands of the old faith. The biggest feat of strength they have is breaking through a little rock wall, and they don't really have any speed feats to speak of. The characters don't even have a dodge ability. They just put up their shield. They aren't shown capable of even dodging arrows. There's a couple times in the game where they come across like a boulder or a big metal door and they can't get through, and they gotta use this sandwich power-up that gives them this giant hulking form. And it's cool and all, but that form only lasts 10 seconds. And it's based on using a consumable item that they can only have 9 of at a time. That means at best, the Castle Crashers have 90 seconds of strength, and they can't even use magic when in this form. And the magic is kind of the best thing they got going for them. Lightning, ice, poison, and fire. And this definitely helps them a little bit, but it's nothing that the basic cultist on the island doesn't have. I mean, the Castle Crashers would really struggle against even the lowest tier of cultists on the island, because even they can break solid stone. Honestly, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the mid-tier cultists on the island would be a match for the boss monsters in the Castle Crashers game. The only real chance that these guys have to survive is the fact that they're not actually heroes. None of them are shown to be heroic in nature just in general. They wouldn't be compelled to go out of their way to save people and stop the cultists and the horrors that are happening on the island. I mean, they're knights. Their whole reason for existing is to serve their king. The only reason why they go off on their adventure they go in their own game is because their king orders them to go stop the wizard and get the princesses back. So there's no evidence that any of them would go out of their way to save people that they weren't ordered to save, or that they weren't duty bound to save. So really the best chance they have for survival is to just stay out of it. Go off somewhere in the wilderness, build a little hut, and just stay out of the way of all the different cultists on the island. Because each knight on his own is kind of only capable of taking out maybe 1 or 2 at a time, if that. And if they run into anybody even a little bit stronger, they're kind of fucked. On top of that, they aren't shown to have any resistances to literally any hacks that exist on the island. Like, how the hell are they going to defend against some random god showing up and deciding to mind fuck them into oblivion? They don't have any defense for that. Mind control doesn't even exist in their world. Possession, soul absorption, death manipulation, etc., etc., it doesn't exist. They have no defense for it at all. They're not even resistant against their own element. Like, you can hurt the red knight who has lightning powers with lightning attacks. That's pretty fucking sad, man. I mean, shit, a large portion of the population on the island are completely immune to poison. That would make the green knight's magic completely worthless. He'd just be a dude with a sword who's barely capable of fighting against the normal cultists. There's no question about this first match. It's a wash. The Castle Crashers are not winning. Maybe they can stay hidden for a little bit, but they have absolutely no recourse for fighting against anything on this island. Alright, next combatant is a little better, kinda. We got Jin, also known as Monsterboy from Monsterboy and the Cursed Kingdom. This character has a little better of an arsenal in terms of physical and magical ability that can help him survive on the island. Runs so fast he can break the sound barrier and just straight up run across water. Physically strong enough to bore down into the center of a volcano with a single attack, as well as having several different transformations he can turn into with a bunch of cool little powers that can help him to survive. Things like a dragon form to help him fly, or a frog form that helps him breathe underwater and swim really fast. Just things that would be really helpful for him to survive in this very hostile environment. Because of his physical abilities, he'll actually be capable of fighting pretty much all of the low and mid-tier cultists. Although he still doesn't stand a chance against any of the bosses, and especially not the bishops or the lamb. However, I don't think he's going to make it very far. He might actually die faster than the Castle Crashers do. And the reason for this is because Jin believes himself very strongly to be a hero. He is a very heroic character, and he's not capable of standing aside and allowing other people to suffer without him getting involved. This would make him likely die faster than someone like the knights, who aren't compelled to go out of their way to save people. Jin would force himself into the conflict fighting all these cultists and stuff, trying to save people's lives, which would very quickly get the attention of the higher ups in the cult and the bishops and the lamb. This would put a target on his back and make them come at him pretty goddamn hard. The bishops have already been shown to be able to just appear anywhere on the island they want to, knowing exactly where everything is at all times. There are multiple instances where you're doing shit as the lamb where the bishops just appear to talk to you. They don't kill you because they're not capable of doing that, but they fuck with you incessantly. But when it comes to Jin, if he's running around making a racket, killing all their people, there's no reason why they just can't appear in front of him and instantly murder him. And just like the Castle Crashers, he comes from a universe where pretty much all of the powers and abilities are physical in nature, so he has no defenses for any of the more hacksy abilities like death manipulation, mind control, and stuff like this. On top of that, Jin comes from a very black and white world. Jin himself is a straight up heroic character, and his villains are just straight up villainous characters. There's no nuance to the evil that exists in the Monsterboy franchise, and Jin's never come into contact with something like that. So even if he could survive for a while fighting against the cultists without getting the bishop's attention, if he runs into any other characters who have a little more intelligence in their evil, they're probably going to be able to manipulate Jin pretty easily. Like if Jin were to run into someone like Sozo, who seems very kind and friendly on the surface, it would not be that hard for Sozo to manipulate Jin and brainwash him into staying there just like all of the other mental slaves that are on Sozo's territory. Jin would have to learn very quickly and catch up to the fact that everyone who's pretending to help him here are actually trying to hurt him, which is something he's never come across before in his own stories. So because of all of these things put together, despite Jin being more powerful than the Castle Crashers, he's probably dying faster. He will likely die the fastest of anyone on this entire list. Next up is Skul from Skul the Hero Slayer. I actually really like this one. I think this will be interesting. For one, the way Skul's character is means that he will not be like the Knights and Jin where he just runs off, gets into a fight, and gets himself killed. You see, Skul comes from a world that would make it very confusing when he gets to the island. In Skul's universe, he's a henchman to the Demon Lord, who's actually like not that bad of a guy, and the heroes of his land are very corrupt and kind of fucked up. So in Skul's mind, the people who look and appear to be the most evil, he will see them as being alright dudes, you know? It's the heroes that are completely going to throw him off. And Cult of the Lamb doesn't really have any heroes. This means that at least at first, Skul's not going to go there and immediately jump in and try and fight all the cultists, because to him, they'll kind of seem like the good guys. It might actually take a second or two for him to figure out just how fucked up the bad guys on this island are, and that the bad guys are indeed bad guys here. On top of that, Skul's powers will actually be very useful here. So Skul has the ability to take the skulls of his enemies and swap it out with his skull, and then he acquires all the powers and abilities that that person has. And for the purposes of this challenge, he will have access to all the skulls that he had in his own game. Some of the skulls he has were skulls of like Greek and Norse gods. Like he has the skull of Thor. And it is a part of the story in his game that Skul is capable of using these skulls at the highest potential possible. So for instance, when Skul does get like the skull of Thor and put it on, he has the same powers and abilities as Thor. But as he upgrades the skull, he eventually raises that potential to a point that even Thor couldn't use his powers to. He basically becomes a stronger copy of whoever he stole the skull from. And he's got like 40 different skulls with various powers that he'll have access to on the island. This also means that his lack of haxy abilities doesn't really matter, because all he has to do is kill a single cultist with a hax-like ability, and then he can wear their skull and use those abilities as well. He can run into a cultist who's just like a little bit stronger than he is, take him on, beat him, wear his skull, boom, now all of a sudden he's stronger, and he can take on a slightly stronger cultist, then a slightly stronger cultist, and keep doing that and work his way up the chain until he's eventually powerful enough to fight the godlike beings. Not to mention, he also has the power of resurrection, which means he has multiple attempts to be able to figure this shit out. This will give him the ability to make some mistakes, unlike Jin and the Castle Crashers are able to. But there is one small issue here. While it's true that he can use the full potential of any skull he wields, that's only with the assistance of this big spider bitch that helps him in his game. He can't do that shit on his own. She has to unlock the potential of those skulls for him. And while he is getting all his powers and weapons and skulls and stuff from the previous game, the spider bitch is not following him to the island. So any skull he acquires on the island, he will not be able to use the full potential of. This, and the fact that he can only have a certain number of skulls on him at any given time and only use the powers of one skull that he's wearing, like he can't mix and match powers at the same time, he has to keep switching between them, means that his power is very limited here. The simple fact is that Skul is not powerful enough to take on characters like the bishops or the Lamb himself. And it doesn't matter how many cultists he steals the skull of, that's never going to change, because these characters dwarf any other character on the island in power. Without him having the ability to enhance those skulls to surpass their original owners, he's just not capable of taking on the top tier guys. And despite having the ability to resurrect, he doesn't really have any defenses for a lot of the haxy abilities that the characters on the island have. For instance, even if he does try to resurrect, the Lamb can still just take his soul away. You can't resurrect if your soul is ripped out of your body and torn to pieces. Honestly, I don't see Skul being killed by the bishops or the Lamb, but I do see him getting indoctrinated into one of the two cults. He's going to essentially be turned into a really powerful cultist. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if the Lamb goes into a dungeon crawl and then among the many cultists he slaughters through, he runs into the indoctrinated Skul, who is now currently working under the bishops. That to me just seems like the most likely scenario. Next is Shovel Knight. Oh dear God. I put way too many characters on this list. Fuck, I could have gotten a perfectly fine length video with half the amount of characters that I put on. If I make a part 2, there aren't going to be as many characters. This is going to be a long fucking video. Anyway, Shovel Knight would actually do pretty well in terms of survival. Despite him not being all that strong when compared to even basic cultists on the island, he actually has a lot of abilities and powers that make him really hard to kill. Things like magic deflection, intangibility, invulnerability, and time stop will go a really long way to keeping his ass alive. And he's shown in the game dodging lightning, meaning he's faster than the vast majority of the regular mortal level characters. So he's only really going to be in danger if he comes across the stronger characters on the island, like the Lamb, the bishops, and maybe some of the bosses. The problem is, that's probably going to happen. Once again, Shovel Knight is a heroic character who goes out of his way to help other people and always be of service to those that he sees as the weak or the vulnerable. Alright, so let me clarify. I know that I keep bringing up the hero angle. I'm not saying that a character who is heroic will automatically die in the Cult of the Lamb universe. universe. What I am saying is for the weaker characters on this list, if they feel a compulsion to go after and fix all the problems on the island, forcing themselves in the pathway of the most powerful characters here, then they might be fucking killing themselves. You can be a good guy and try to help the people around you and go out of your way to help the downtrodden, but don't make the entire world your problems if you're not strong enough to fix them. So the question would be, is Shovel Knight capable of essentially looking away from a lot of the horrors that happen on the island and essentially allowing the oppression of the cults and the cult leaders to just go by the wayside? And if he's not capable of looking away and forces himself to get involved, he will most certainly be killed. Now, in his defense, he may actually not. In his own game, he has one particular mission that he's trying to solve. And on his way, he comes across various characters who need help and he assists them while aiming towards this particular goal. If Shovel Knight doesn't make it his goal to go after the main bosses of the game, then he should be okay. He can just live and survive on the island, only fighting the cultists that he comes across and only saving people who, again, he comes across. And this is a separation I make between him and Jin. Jin is always compelled to make everything good and great throughout the whole world. If there is an evil dictator, Jin will go out of his way to go on an adventure and topple that evil dictator. Shovel Knight, it's a little more in the air whether or not he would actually do that. I would argue probably not, but I think there's a limit. It's not like the whole society of the Land of the Old Faith is more or less okay with some dictatorial elements. The whole island is completely morally reprehensible. You can't walk 200 feet without coming across cannibalism or ritualistic sacrifice. It is commonplace. It is the norm. So how long would Shovel Knight be able to go on the island and just ignore all of it? Because while he does have a lot of defensive magics that will help him against the regular cultist characters, none of them will help him all that much against the godlike beings that exist here. With the exception of magical deflection, all of the abilities I stated that he has earlier are only abilities that last a couple of seconds, and it's not like he can spam them. So he'll be able to use things like invulnerability, intangibility, and time stop one time to get out of a particularly hairy situation, but that's about it. They can be used as a quick get out of jail free card, basically. He can't just use time stop, walk up to one of the bishops, murder them, and leave. It doesn't last that long, and he can't use it that many times. He can basically use it right before he's about to die to get out of the way and escape, and that's about it. Also, unlike someone like Skul, who is actually capable of increasing his power once he gets to the island, Shovel Knight's power is all based on his equipment and the things that he brought with him. Like, every single power he has comes from a weapon or a relic or some kind of item. That's it. So once he gets to the island, he has no real way of increasing his power further than that. And many of these items that he uses are only one-time use. So he has resurrection, but the item he uses to resurrect goes away after he uses it one time, meaning he only has one do-over. So when it comes to this one, I'm giving a bit of a caveat. Yes, he's capable of surviving with difficulty, but he will not be thriving on this island. And he's certainly not overtopping the evil regime. If he's capable of allowing the evil that happens on the island to continue and just live his life, he'll be fine and he'll be able to fight and survive when those moments arise. But anything more than that, if there's that little voice in the back of his head that's telling him, hey, you need to stop all this evil, he's gonna die. Okay, so the next three on this list are the ones that actually stand a pretty decent chance on taking on the entire island. And the first we're gonna start off with is Cuphead. As far as overall power, pretty much nothing on the island is capable of fighting against him, with the exception of the bishops and the lamb himself. He's basically gonna freely skip back and forth across his entire island without any issues whatsoever. In his own game, Cuphead is capable of defeating Glumstone, who is stated to be a mountain, like a living mountain, and he's from a race of giants who each giant became a different mountain within the world of Cuphead. So yeah, he beats a literal mountain. That by itself puts him above 99% of the island. Now, how he will do against the bishops and the lamb is kind of a different story. So how powerful are they? Well, we know that the one who waits dwarfed the size of a mountain range. Like, he stood up and was greater than the entire mountain range. So considerably larger than Glumstone. However, we know the bishops were nowhere near as strong as the one who waits. It took the power of all four bishops combined to go after the one who waits. They couldn't even beat him. All they could do was trap him in another realm. And all four of them almost died with permanent wounds that are still bleeding to this day that just won't heal, despite the fact that all of these bishops have the ability to regenerate. So this shows a pretty massive power gap between the bishops and the one who waits. How massive is it? I'm not sure, but it's clearly considerable. The bishops even talk about it in the game that if the one who waits were to escape, they don't think they'd be able to beat him again, because how they were able to trap him in that other alternate dimension would not work on him a second time now that he knows how they did it. So in a physical confrontation, the one who waits is more than 4 times stronger than a bishop at bare minimum. And on top of that, Cuphead does have some pretty cool powers that will help him against the bishops. Things like being able to travel to the astral plane and attack from there so that he's basically invulnerable to all damage, and being able to fully control his own soul and control his soul and his body separate from one another are some pretty cool abilities that the bishops have never really come across before. This makes me personally believe that while probably a close fight, I think Cuphead will be able to defeat a bishop one-on-one. However, considering that the one who waits was defeated in single combat by the lamb and had all of his powers taken by the lamb, I don't see Cuphead having any way of taking down the lamb himself. And the powers I've listed before really wouldn't be all that helpful to him, because the lamb has ways around all of them. While it's never shown that the lamb can go into the astral plane, it is shown that he can travel between different universes. He's shown traveling freely to purgatory as well as the weird prison dimension that the one who waits is trapped in. He has no issues going back and forth. So there's really no reason for me to believe that if the lamb finds out about this other astral plane that he would be able to travel there, or at least figure out how to go there at some point. If this does happen, this means that Cuphead's best defensive ability against the lamb would be completely worthless. The ability to have his soul leave his body and have it fight independently from his body is pretty cool, but the lamb has been shown to be able to absorb souls and just straight up grab them and pull them into himself. So if Cuphead does do this, he will be making himself vulnerable to the lamb and capable of having his soul taken and basically instantly killed. So basically he can't use two of his best abilities. Outside of that, he does have some like Toon Force abilities, which I think will be helpful, but nothing that really would turn the tide of a fight like that. Now, if I put both Cuphead and Mugman on the island together, like the brother duo, maybe it might change things for a little bit. I think it might make the fight a little bit harder, but honestly, at the end of the day, I just think that the lamb is just far more powerful than Cuphead still. Basically, Cuphead would become the second strongest character on the entire island, whose power is then dwarfed by the lamb. Because like I said, the lamb is vastly superior to anyone else on the island, including all four of the bishops combined. And fighting a living mountain, while impressive, especially compared to the bishops, it's not that impressive when compared to the one who waits, who was soloed by the lamb. So yeah. Now, one of the things about Cuphead that will help him survive is the fact that he's not a heroic character. He doesn't feel the need to go out of his way and save people unless they're specifically related to him. So he doesn't really have a reason to fight the bishops or the lamb, and they don't really have a reason to fight him either. And I think it is far more likely that the Cuphead will get involved with someone like Midas. He's kind of a daredevil and likes adventure and stuff like this, but the reason why he does these things is because he likes stuff. He's a very greedy character. The inciting incident of the Cuphead game is when Cuphead gets tricked into selling his soul to the devil to get something that he wants. So while I wouldn't say Cuphead is naive and easily tricked, he is capable of being fooled if you wave something in front of him that he wants, which is what makes me think that someone like Midas will be a serious issue for him. Midas is the gold obsessed guy I talked about earlier, and his home is literally just a mountain of gold. In the game, he is shown forcefully turning people into gold, manipulating people, and then having them turned into gold, stealing from people, all kinds of whatever he can do to acquire more gold and more riches. This will make him and his territory very appealing for someone like Cuphead, and he will likely get involved with him in some way. While Cuphead is far more powerful than Midas is, Midas might have the ability to manipulate him with gold in order to essentially trick him into turning him into gold. So that'll be all about whether or not Cuphead can actually see through Midas's trickery and basically outplay his character. However, doing so and stealing from Midas will make Midas a permanent enemy of Cuphead until he is dealt with. Which again, Cuphead can do by outright murdering Midas since he's not that powerful, but it's mostly going to be about just how much Cuphead learned from his experiences with the devil. If he learned his lesson, he can deal with it. If he didn't, and the same story beat that happened with the devil happens with Midas, then he's getting turned into gold. But yeah, overall, I think Cuphead will mostly do fine on the island because he won't be dealing with the strongest characters there. He just has no reason to unless the bishops or the lamb go out of their way to fuck with him, which usually they don't really do. He just has no reason to do that unless the bishops or the lamb go out of their way to fuck with him, which, don't get me wrong, could definitely happen, but more often than not, if the bishops find someone that's more of a problem than they're worth, they just don't deal with them. And that to me seems like the category that Cuphead is a part of. Like I said about the lamb earlier in the video, he's kind of an opportunist, and while I wouldn't go as far as to say that the bishops are also opportunists, they're not going to go out of their way to destroy their entire empire just to fuck with this dude who shoots little pistol fingers for no reason. Like, they would have to have a reason to go after him, and since he's not a heroic character who will go out of his way to take them down, they have no reason, so he should be good. So there we go, we arrived at the first character on the list that isn't completely fucked by the island. Nice. Alright, two more, let's fucking do it. Up next we have the Knight from Hollow Knight. This one is super interesting because it almost seems like the Knight was perfectly designed to fight against the cults. So within the game of Hollow Knight, Knight, there are these different characters called vessels, and these vessels were created by the Pale King for the sole purpose of defeating this villain called the Absolute Radiance. The Absolute Radiance is a god of light, and any person who is hit by that light or who sees the light basically loses their mind and just goes insane and starts going on like killing sprees and shit. It's like a form of mind manipulation or madness manipulation. Because of this, the vessels were created with no mind to speak of. They are simply vessels. They don't have memories or emotions or thoughts or even a soul of their own. They are literally empty vessels with nothing. This was done so they were incapable of being messed with by the fuckery of the madness manipulation light beams and shit. And because of this, the Knight is kind of the perfect weapon to be used against the cults. What the Absolute Radiance was doing is very similar to what the leaders of the cults are doing to pretty much everyone on the entire island. Pretty much any mental ability that the gods of this world have would not work on the Knight. Indoctrination, mind reading, mind control, empathy manipulation, whatever. None of it works. At one point, the White Lady, who's like this really powerful pseudo god, is incapable of seeing anything inside the Knight. Nothing. Like, she can't read its thoughts. She can't do anything in terms of its mind because there's literally nothing there. So all of the issues that everybody else is going to run to in this list, which is everyone constantly trying to manipulate and fuck with them and basically indoctrinate them into cults, won't work on the Knight. Now, I do have to kind of change the Knight's personality just a sliver. The Knight doesn't have desires or wants of its own, so it has no reason to even be on the island or to attack anyone on the island. Its only purpose is to fight the Absolute Radiance, which it already did at the end of Hollow Knight. So to make the story of this theoretical situation that I'm throwing the Knight into make sense, I'm just going to say that because the cults act so similarly to the Absolute Radiance, that the Knight is viewing them the same as he would view the Absolute Radiance. Basically, he is going to have the purpose now of going after the cult leaders. Because otherwise, his personality would make it so that he has nothing to do with them and would in no way get involved. He would essentially just keep trying to leave the island to get back to the Hollow Nest so he can defend it from the Absolute Radiance over and over again forever. It would never stop. So we're gonna throw that little piece away just so, you know, this is an entertaining conversation. So is the Knight actually capable of taking down these cults? Most of them, yeah. A lot of it, for sure. The Knight is extremely fast, able to travel multiple times faster than the speed of sound. Arguably, you could say thousands of times faster than the speed of sound. I have heard arguments that people say that he can travel faster than light. This is not true. They say this because the Knight fights against the Absolute Radiance, who uses light beams as weapons, and you can dodge the light beams, but the light beams have a clear charge time before they're fired. There's even a little sound effect that pops up that's like a charge up sound effect, so it's not something that's just done for mechanics. It's a part of the visual storytelling of the game. So there's no way in hell I'm saying that he's as fast as light. Clearly he's not. If he was as fast as light, the light beams would not be a threat to him at all. If that were the case, every time a light beam was shot at him, it would just be like someone running at him at equal speed that he can run in a straight line from like 30 feet away. He would have all the time in the world to just sidestep away from it. It wouldn't even be that hard to react to. But no, the light beams in the game are actually treated as a legitimate threat and something you really have to get out of the way of very quickly. As far as physical power goes, it's a little odd because on one hand, he did destroy the entirety of Godhome. And although we don't know how impressive this is because we don't know the size of it, it's pretty fucking big. Like, just based on some of the levels you see as he runs through them, it's obvious this place is massive in size. Whether or not it's the size of, say, a city or a country or a planet, we don't know. But the part that makes it a little weird is that Godhome is not a real place. It exists within a dream world. So are the things within Dream World actually physical, or are they all just representative like dreams are? He's never shown destroying this much shit in the real world. In the real world, the most impressive shit he's shown destroying is really thick stone walls and shit, which is nowhere near the Bishops or the Lamb. But if we take Godhome as literal, as like a literal place that he literally destroys, then it's a lot closer. It's like destroying, I don't know, I guess an entire city. We're gonna go with city. Like I said, we don't know how big it is. We're not going to assume it's the size of a planet or a country. I think comparing it to that of a large city would probably be a lot closer. So until the creators of the game come out and tell us otherwise, we're just going to assume that Godhome is a real place that physically exists. And this does make sense because the Knight doesn't like go to sleep and go into Dream World. He actually uses the nail to open up a portal and travels physically to Dream World. So it does make sense that Dream World is an actual real physical place as it is being interacted with physically. Anyway, just based on these physical abilities, he should be strong enough to take on the Bishops and the Lamb. But as we've already talked about, if he's not capable of defending against the Haxes that these characters have, he's gonna die either way. When you look at the Haxes of the Lamb and the Haxes of the Knight and compare them to each other, you start to realize that for every single Hax that one character has, the other character has some kind of defense for it. Both characters are capable of trapping victims into some kind of alternate prison dimension. Both characters in their games are shown being able to escape prison dimensions. Both characters have the ability to control the minds of others. Both characters are shown not being able to be mind controlled in their own game. Both characters have the power to control souls, steal souls, fuck with souls. Both characters are shown their souls cannot be fucked with. And you can go down the list. You know that thing I said I didn't know what it was when the lamb has corruption manipulation? Yeah, apparently the knight resists corruption manipulation. Whatever the fuck that is. There really isn't that much that one can do to the other and vice versa. But there are a couple of things. Despite the long list of powers that the knight has, he doesn't really have a way to permanently put down the lamb. And the knight himself doesn't really have anything against just dying normally. The knight isn't what we see in the game. That's just a shell. And within that shell is a shade who is the real form of the knight. You break the shell, the shade comes out, and then you destroy the shade, which can be destroyed by normal weapons. Once the shade is destroyed, the knight's done. He doesn't have any way of coming back. And again, he doesn't have a soul, so you essentially just erased him from existence by killing him normally. And this is the part of the video where we sort of have to talk about the difference between game mechanics and lore. In the game mechanics of Hollow Knight, when Hollow Knight dies, he comes back to life and he's waiting on this bench thing ready to go and continue on with his quest. Once he returns to the place he died, he sees his shade there and then has to fight his shade for all of his currency and stuff. Very Dark Souls-like. While this is a very popular game mechanic, in the lore, the knight can't come back to life. There's nothing in the lore stating he can. The shade is actually his real body, and destroying it would just mean that he dies permanently. The character does not have any form of resurrection. This is a video game respawn, not a lore-accurate way of coming back to life. And this severely hurts him in a fight against the lamb, because the lamb, it's kind of the opposite. For instance, in Cult of the Lamb, as far as the lore is concerned, the lamb can use the red crown, which is the thing on his head that gives him all of his powers, and transform it into any weapon or item that he wants. Outside of the dungeons, he's shown doing this all the time. He transforms it into an axe to cut down a tree, transforms it into a pickaxe, transforms it into a broom to sweep up some shit, which I'm sure the red crown is not happy about. At the beginning of the game, he's shown instantly having it transform into the Crusader's blade, but when he actually goes into the dungeon, he just is given a random weapon that he has to use for that run. This is entirely a game mechanic that has no explanation in lore whatsoever. It's just there because it's a roguelike, and that's how roguelikes are. In the actual lore of the game, as well as outside of the dungeons, we see the lamb being able to use whatever item he wants to from the red crown. He is not limited to one at a time. It's the same with curses. The lamb should have access to every single curse that is in his repertoire. He should not be limited to one, because the curses come from the red crown, which he wears at all times. Limiting access to only one per dungeon run is entirely a game mechanic thing, and it works the exact same way when it comes to death. He can be damaged and even killed in gameplay. However, it's spoken multiple times that the god of death chooses when he dies. You can't kill a god of death. In fact, you can't even damage a god of death. There is actually a lore-accurate way of playing the game when you go into the settings and you can take off damage completely. Essentially, you play a immortality mode where your character just straight up can't die, and you can play through the whole end game like that after you become the god of death. The whole reason why Narendra was locked in another dimension to begin with, as opposed to being murdered by the bishops, is because they can't kill him. They don't know how. In the story mode of the game, when the lamb goes around and kills all of the bishops, he is then told that they're all still alive and has to go through and kill them all again. Despite them still having the wounds from their previous fight and incapable of healing from them, the same way they couldn't heal from the wounds that were given to them from the one who waits, they're still alive. The lamb doesn't even go about killing them a second time. He just indoctrinates them. Now, you do have the option in the game as the lamb to kill Narendra, but only after you defeat Narendra and become the new god of death. You have to essentially strip them of their godhood in order to do that. The fact is that the knight just doesn't have anything that makes him capable of killing the lamb. Even in his own story, when he goes after the Absolute Radiance, he's not capable of killing her. All this shadow shit comes in and grabs her and pulls her in, and she's just sort of trapped. He can't actually physically kill her. And it would be the same situation between the knight and the lamb. He could try to seal the lamb, but the lamb's already been able to show that he has no issues traveling back and forth between dimensions, including prison dimensions that are specifically meant to seal people there. And while the knight doesn't have a way of killing the lamb does have a couple of ways of killing the knight. He just has to hit him with a sword a lot. Eventually, the knight will die, and that's not even his only way of killing it. Despite the knight actually being a lot faster than the lamb, and even being able to resist time stops, so the lamb's time manipulation won't do anything, many of the curses and relics that the lamb uses just straight up instantly kills everyone in the vicinity the moment he uses it. It's not a projectile that you could dodge. It just happens. And while the knight can survive the vast majority of these due to his really high level regeneration, there is one that he can't. It's a transmogrification move that instantly turns an enemy into a critter. In the Cult of the Lamb universe, a critter is like a tiny little spider looking thing that's like a 1/4 inch tall. They lose all powers powers, characteristics, and abilities that they had before they were transformed into a critter, and they just become basically like a dumb little bug. And you could try to make the argument that the knight is already a bug, so it wouldn't really work. Yes, it would. Yeah, I suppose in some weird roundabout way, you could say the knight is a bug, despite the fact that he's just like a shade. He's still a 1.5 foot tall, super powered bug with all kinds of crazy abilities. In this case, he would be turned into like a normal little critter bug. And again, he would lose all his powers and abilities. This is an instant win for the lamb if he decides to use this power on him. It's really just whether or not he'll use them. And if the fight goes on long enough, which it will, because neither character is affected by fatigue or time in any way. They don't get tired, they don't need sleep, they don't need food. It's only a matter of time before the lamb uses this ability. And the knight has no defense for it whatsoever. I tried really hard looking at the knight's powers, trying to find something that the lamb does not defend against at some point in the game, and I couldn't find it. The lamb just had an answer to his entire arsenal of abilities. So how will the knight do? He'll do very well. He'll fight his way throughout the entirety of the lands of the Old Faith, beating any cultist he comes across. He will very likely defeat the bishops as well, although I do not believe he'll be able to put them down permanently. And then he'll get to the lamb and get into a very long battle where they are both using their entire arsenal against one another until the lamb eventually realizes that he could just turn this motherfucker into a bug and be done with it. So we're at Issac from the Binding of Issac, and goddamn does this character have such a long list of powers. Why did I do this? Why did I even add this character to the list? He could have been his whole own video. It's so long. It took me so long to read through every single power across all games, but I did it. It's done. So let's get through. Let's just be done with this. Come on. So despite having such a long list of powers, most of them aren't going to really be that useful against the lamb or the bishop. Issac will do just fine against all the cultists. Despite the fact that Issac is actually way slower than anyone on the island, he just has so many powers that he could fuck over the cultists with that they have no defense for. He essentially doesn't even really need to fight them most of the time. He can just walk into any room full with cultists and completely fucking obliterate them with one of his 10,000 different powers. But what can he do against the lamb and the bishops? Not that much, surprisingly. I actually put him last on this list because I thought he was going to be the one person that can actually defeat them. But when I read through his powers, I was surprised to see that they're actually not as good as I remember. Like, he has crazy good powers like probability manipulation, reality warping, black hole creation, all this kind of stuff, but none of it would really be useful. The reality warping only affects the environment. It never actually affects a person. Same thing goes with probability manipulation. It doesn't actually affect people. It affects items. Really, when it comes down to it, he only has 2 powers that maybe would work, but not really. So he does have transmogrification where he can turn enemies into different things, like he turns enemies into gold or whatever. But in Cult of the Lamb, Midas already does that. And if that was something that could work on the gods, wouldn't Midas have already done that already? Not to mention the lamb has transmogrification that, like I said before, can turn people into critters, but that power doesn't work on the bishops. And Midas himself does attempt to turn the lamb's cult members into gold, as well as rob the lamb personally, but never actually attempts to turn the lamb himself into gold, despite being obsessed with turning everyone to gold. This makes me believe that all the gods in this world are immune to transmogrification. I don't think Issac would be able to turn any of them into gold, even if he was capable of hitting them with that attack, which he's not because he's considerably slower than all of them. The other attack, and really the only attack that would work, is something called Chaos Card, which basically kills all enemies in the area. And the thing that makes this so useful is that in his own game, it kills enemies who are essentially immune to death. Like, even characters that can't be killed the normal way are still killed with this ability. So I'm making the assumption that this ability can negate the usual resistance to death manipulation. So yes, this would be able to kill the bishops as well as the lamb. The problem is that the bishops were killed by the lamb and came back anyway. And the lamb, being a death god, can just constantly come back to life over and over again. So killing them would not be a permanent solution. So at the end of the day, all of these powers that Issac has would make him essentially a god to the cultists, but really not all that big of a deal to the godlike characters. Maybe if he was faster and physically stronger, he'd be more of a match face to face, but really any one of the god characters completely dwarf him in that category, and they would absolutely slaughter him. And lastly, despite Issac having all manner of different powers that he could fuck with other people with, he doesn't have that many resistances to stuff. Like, he has no resistance whatsoever to any form of mind control. So the main means that the cult leaders use to fuck with people, Issac can't defend against. He would be completely indoctrinated by the first god that he comes into contact with, whether it be the lambs or one of the bishops. So when it comes to Issac, his only real way of survival is kind of the way some of the lower level people could survive, which is if he just doesn't try to take on the cults head on, which I don't think he would. Issac is not a character who goes out of his way way to stop evil. His entire games are about people bringing the problems to him, not him bringing it to them. I honestly think Isaac will be like Scooby-Doo traveling across this island, being terrified at all of the crazy dark things he comes into contact with, but I don't believe he'll ever be killed by anything because I don't think he'll go out of his way to cause problems for anyone. So I know that's kind of an anticlimactic ending. I honestly thought he was the one that was going to overcome everything because of his long-ass list of powers. But it's been several years since I played the Binding of Isaac, so I guess my mind just exaggerated how much his power was. I probably should have ended this video with Hollow Knight, but that's it. We're at the end of the list. My plan for this video originally was to discuss all of the characters getting on the island one by one, and then at the end seeing what would happen if all the characters arrived on the island at the same time, to see like how these characters would interact and what exactly would go on there. But this video is so unbelievably long already, and I feel like talking about that would double the length. So if that's something you're interested in hearing about, I can talk about it in a separate video, depending on how well this video does and how high the demand is. And like I said, I actually play a lot of these types of games, so if you guys want a part 2 where I have a whole new set of heroes arrive to an island, or even arrive to a totally different horrifying place just to see what would happen, that's also a possibility. Just, you know, ask for it. Make sure this video gets out there and it gets a decent amount of views, and I'll do it. So, you know, that means like, comment, subscribe, share, all that different stuff, because these videos take a long time to make. And while I enjoy making them, I'm not going to devote that kind of time to something that no one's going to watch. So, you know, be a bro, man. Anyway, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Y'all be safe out there, you hear?